So I think it's important to note right off the bat that I'm not here for my work as a playwright. I'm here because I also produce my own work. And as a producer, that's a different toolbox than being a playwright. And it's an odd thing. If you're a playwright who produces your own work, it's kind of like being a writer who then has to enter the publishing business. So you assemble a manuscript, and then you build your own printing press and a distribution network and a storefront to sell your wares. The skills required on both sides of the equation are different. They're distinct from each other. And while a playwright who undertakes producing their own work, that can be a huge sign of an ego out of control. It can also be something else. And in my case, I hope it also means it's a sign of desperation. That's a good thing. But that what we're saying needs to be said and needs to be heard, and if we have to be the avenue for it. And since a script is nothing more than a recipe for a series of events, it's only half realized in written form. And no matter how many drafts you do, it's just a half-baked thing. So George Sebastian Coleman saw War Crimes last summer. He saw our production of it. And it's only by chance that he saw that show, and by chance he was brought into contact with us. And so I stand here as the product of a series of coincidences. And the distinction between a producer and a playwright is an important one, because in thinking about what I wanted to say tonight, I was struck by the fact that instead of my work with our theater company, Conflict of Interest, because of that I've been pulled towards thinking about, instead of sublime things, incredibly mundane things. So I could lots of tales about union contracts and insurance rates and calendars. And the business of theater production, in so much as it can be called a business, since the money flows in one direction and it's not towards our pockets, provides so many distractions on a day-to-day basis that one quickly forgets why we do this. And I realized this week that I have not thought for a long time about why one writes plays, or even how. So when you're in the midst of chaos of production, all that matters is meeting deadlines, something that all writers know pretty well. So one of my first professors as an undergraduate instilled in me enduring respect for the past, or rather not to take myself too seriously. Because we were looking at melodramatic stuff from the early 20th century, and he warned us that you laugh now, but you're lucky if someday somebody will be laughing at you. And what I realized is how fleeting every moment in time is, and how every moment on stage is. And I would be lucky if my work became relevant in my lifetime, let alone eligible for mockery later. So why playwriting? Why write? While everything I'm about to say makes this untrue, I try as a rule to avoid aphorisms, just in case they trap you, because they trapped me. I started out as an actor. No, you haven't seen me in anything. And in the past 5 years, in the first 5 years of that, of trying to cobble out a career, one of the little clever sayings I used to say is, if you can do something else, you're going to do that other thing. And in the first draft of War Crimes, in fact, was written during a grueling tour of Charlotte's Web around the country, where I played the narrator. So I killed that spider 185 times over the course of 6 months. And it was somewhere around Houston in the back of a van that I started composing the president's speeches, and it was somewhere on a highway in Virginia that Martha's monologue started coming into shape. And all the time I'm sitting there trying to have a career as an actor. In the back of my head, I'm saying, if I can do something else, I'm going to be doing that instead. So the first pieces of writing that I did were scripts for myself, because I was frustrated with the auditions that I was getting or wasn't getting. And in a fit of vanity, I started writing roles that I wanted to inhabit, my ideal ones. And this made for really, really bad writing. The main problem, and there were many, was that I was still writing from a profoundly selfish place. I wanted to look good. I was carving out lines that, would make me look good on stage, and the resulting products were crap. So the work that led me to believe that I could do writing was actually not script writing, but writing about theater. And because I wasn't looking to have a career in writing, all those skills that I was using for auditioning kind of backed me into it, and they were useful in a sideways way. it wasn't apparent, but you know, the way that you're rejected as an actor, the way that you're condescended to your face, or the way that you're just ignored after hundreds and hundreds of headshots, a rejection letter isn't really that bad in retrospect. It's, by comparison, it's really nice. It's really complicated. So the breakthrough in my script writing came in a really straightforward manner. And it was when I stopped writing for myself. And there's no universal profile for a playwright, but the one thing that's common for the process is that at a very early stage, the playwright steps aside. And that's when the piece comes out. You're not the focus. And if you are, it tends to be when an actor in rehearsal turns around and asks you a question, which means you've probably messed up because it's not apparent in the script. So the principles that guide me in composing, and actually no, that's not an accurate title. They're not principles so much as really glaring mistakes that I try to avoid the second time around. They were things that were already there, that I already saw. And one more caveat before I get into those things was, I don't believe in any laws that govern how a script gets made. I think if you put a bunch of playwrights in a room together, you have as many ways to write a play as you have bodies in the room. So this isn't true for anyone outside of me, but I found that there are threads behind my thinking about writing for the stage, and I'm still finding them. But at best, here's everything I needed to learn in kindergarten poster without the good writing. In any event, here are the essential truths about playwriting. It's collaborative, it's ephemeral, it's universal, it's reactionary, and it's hopeless. So call me Mr. Sunshine. So how does this work in practice? To say that playwriting is collaborative is not exactly a revelation. Obviously, it's a collaborative medium, but the idea that there's this wall between the playwright and the scene fully realized on stage, even though it's a very persuasive one, isn't true. And this is a front that I fight with other playwrights as well. The playwright is a catalyst, there's no denying that, but she or he is a preliminary step in a much, much longer chain of events. And so even the polished script is a first step, it's a recipe, it's a list of ingredients that, when applied in proper proportion, produce a result. And some ingredients are more important than others. Some items can be altered and left out altogether without ruining the meal. But the key fact is the author of the cookbook is not the cook. So take, for instance, stage directions. If you ever read a play by Ibsen, you know that they can be a bear. So here's the opening stage direction from Ghosts. A spacious garden room with one door to the left, two doors to the right. In the middle of the room, a round table with chairs about it. On the table lie books, periodicals, and newspapers. In the foreground, to the left, a window, and by it a small sofa with a workable table in front of it. In the background, the room is continued into a somewhat narrower conservatory, the walls of which are formed by large panes of glass. In the right-hand wall of the conservatory is a door leading to the garden. This is my favorite part. Through the glass wall, the gloomy fjord landscape is faintly visible, veiled by a steady, it's just here. So there are some playwrights who take it as their job to create the entire world. They have to go from A to Z and make the universe. And I think that's much more the job of the actors than it is the playwright. The idea that the world of the play comes from the playwright alone is a dangerous one, because playwrights get trapped into thinking they have the predominant voice. And they tend to believe this. If they believe this, they believe they have something new to say, which isn't true. The aphorism that there's nothing new under the sun is true. Theater is not eternal, it's faddish. Sophocles wrote Ajax, and he was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder before that had a name. And Tracy Letts was not the first person to discover in August Osage County that families are rotten to each other. The playwright's job is to tune the tortures of human experience to the time. And sometimes a playwright can be particularly talented at this, but he or she should never be fooled into thinking they've discovered anything. And as if that wasn't bad enough, something I've learned very recently is that sometimes you need someone else to ensure you stay true to your own voice. So as a theater company, my theater company, COI, has produced pretty much everything I've written. And an unintended consequence of that is I now have an in-house stable of literary critics who are intimate experts in everything that I've written. And that is not a fun thing to have at all. If my work on stage has an obligation to be unflinchingly honest, and I'll do more on that later, then as an artist, I have an obligation to be honest with myself about my work and demand the same from my collaborators. So there are a couple of collaborators, director Lee Bonfasudo and dramaturg Felipe Osa, who are now they create the works with me. And we go through each script. We're working on a script for the fall, and it's a 97-page play, and it's really terrible to sit there and be told 97 times how you failed, page after page after page. But it makes you a better writer to be told where you failed than to just hear again and again how you're awesome. So what do I mean when I say that plays are ephemeral? When I was in college, one of my drama professors was Wendy MacLeod, and we did The Water Children in their season. I got the part of Randall, who is, if you haven't read the play, a Southern Christian pro-life activist who people looked at and saw trailer park. So, because of the vagaries of the time, I landed the role, and MacLeod rewrote the character to have a background fitting for my skin tone. And at the time this was happening, the college had invited an order of Tibetan monks to create a mandala, sand painting in the atrium of the library. So for 2 weeks, they hunched over a table for hours at a stretch, painstakingly creating this incredible work of art. And despite my skepticism, I saw them as this magical, divine presence on campus. So somewhere in the middle of their visit, my friend comes up to me. She's got this grin on her face. She goes, "Want to play basketball with the monks?" So I followed, and sure enough, there in the behind the freshman dorms, next to the booth, in their break, the monks were playing basketball. And I thought it was ridiculous to see these men who I took so seriously doing this incredible work, playing a children's game and giggling and laughing around. And I remember I played one of the monks who guarded me used to guard me by tickling me. Good sportsmanship. But the point of that telling that story, other than the fact that the only time you'll hear the words "I was tickled by a monk" outside of deposition, is that I understood how transitive the thing we on stage were building was. Just like it was for their sand mandala when they swept it up, put it in an urn, and put it in the river. And I had always, up until that time, tried to hold on for dear life to the memories of working in a role, or getting souvenirs, or pictures, or taking something away so that the experience of it stayed alive. But for one production of The Water Children, Trailer Park Randall was played by a brown guy. And I no longer needed to hold on to that experience and make it eternal, because that's the nature of the art itself. It's here, then gone. That's intrinsic to its nature, not something to be prevented or avoided. So I say theater is universal. Theater's universality is central to its practice. There has to be something transitive about theater rather than direct. So the script calls for an actor to be enraged at someone on stage for being an unfaithful spouse. They do not need to be married, in love with the actor they're addressing, ever have been cheated on in their life. They must plausibly convey that state of being. And however they manage to approximate that state, we certainly don't judge their success or failure on anything but how convincingly they do this in that moment. So it's, for its part, the audience is not expected to believe that the actors on stage are really married to each other, coming up with their words as they go along, or unaware that an audience is sitting right there. So what we have is two sides of an equation, equally dependent on the suspension of disbelief, of imagination. So if imagination, bridging the gap between my experience and an experience that is larger than mine, is fundamental to theater, if it's the essential element without which the theatrical event simply cannot happen, why do we think that certain racial, gendered, sexual experiences are completely closed off to those outside our immediate tribe? It makes no sense. So I've buried the fact of my skin color this far down in my remarks because I think it's the least interesting factor that goes into my work. And it's the most contentious issue that comes up between me and other theater practitioners. It's race, while it's an undeniable element of our experience, is not a defining element. August Wilson was one of the country's greatest playwrights. He's even greater than he realized. Wilson insisted that he was speaking a privileged and confidential code to a segment of American society who only they could understand what he was saying. And what he articulated was how one group with ill-gotten power over another group, what happens when that filters down from top to bottom. So as a playwright of human behavior, Wilson is one for the ages. As a writer for just the narrow black American identity, he's a blip on the radar. And I'd rather make him the one. So saying theater is reactionary is to say that in this country, theater articulates change, but it rarely serves as a catalyst for it. So I read accounts of the Ernani riots of the 1830s with a lot of jealousy. The idea that in live theater people could riot, so passionate about what they were seeing on stage. They were driven to violence. I wish that I lived in that time. But in our history, the closest thing we have in our Astor Place riots is, Biebermania. If theater practitioners have a skill, that skill is to better articulate a moment, but we rarely define it. And maybe I'm shirking responsibility, but I'm also being clear-eyed about our spot along the cultural spectrum. So that leads me to the least inspiring idea, which is that theater is hopeless. So all of the aspects that I've outlined are in the obstacles to our ability to deliver, to ever take a central place in American culture. Its collaborative nature means that authorship is at best a blurry thing. Its ephemeral nature makes its reification a tricky proposition. And in our culture, we need art to be, at its essence, a distillable thing that can be contained and packaged, parceled, and priced. And the commodification of art, it's not in and of itself evil. One of the things I think gets overlooked when we talk about state sponsorship of arts here compared to Europe is that in this country, artists can become very, very wealthy. Now, the downside of that, which is that most of us don't become wealthy, is that society itself is the greatest marketplace any civilization has ever seen. We sell everything, up to and including ourselves. But the cruel joke is that in such a world, theater is one of the worst products imaginable. It's incredibly hard to convince an American audience that the price of admission to watch a performance is a fair exchange. Now, of course, artists are the last people to care about fair rates of exchange, so maybe the joke's on us. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the cast of War Crimes to do some of the scenes from the show, and then I'll come back and I'll talk a little bit about the composition of it, and then we'll open up to a Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to the cast.
I don't know where I am. This place has changed. He had the preparing. Why are the cells here now? Why do they speak so many languages? How much time has passed? I'm afraid I already know the answers.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. This morning, we witnessed an attempt to weaken the resolve of our great people with another cowardly attack on nothing more fundamental than our way of life. While the American people have tried to offer their hand to the world in partnership, let it not be said that we cannot hold the fist. If those who stand for darkness think that they can make us retreat, to shrink from our duty as a light unto the world, they are sadly mistaken. There will be a time for peace. This, sadly, is not that time. I've met with congressional leaders from both sides of the aisle and conferred with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Effective immediately, I'm declaring a nationwide state of emergency and invoking my powers as Commander-in-Chief to nationalize all divisions of the National Guard. Our enemies will stop at nothing. Neither will we. Effective immediately, Executive Order number 13346 will put into force various provisions of what has been debated in Congress as the Registration Act. I expect all Muslims, citizens of the United States or another nation to register with your local authorities immediately. We will confront evil, and we will prevail. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Oh, right. Listen. The universe speaks to you. The first lecture in a series of 3. Not long from now, your great and proud nation will be reduced to a secondary status, the ruins of an empire. My descendants, inhabitants of the Nederlands, have been happily so reduced for nearly 500 years. The Hague, once the epicenter of our commercial enterprises, now is the same for justice, meted out for crimes against humanity, a necessity in light of the ingenuity and industry that man has for war. I tell you all this as a comfort. Such falls have happened before. Here's what will be. Your encounter with Islamo-fascists at the onset of this century was not an isolated event. Chicago, Seattle, Houston, shootings, bombings, much death. Some attackers will look as you expect. Others will look and sound like you. This latter fact will be lost on most of your people. A grenade thrown on the floor of the stock exchange will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Camps erected on American soil. In one, prisoners die. Your president, the man you have just seen, will resign. On a trip overseas after his forced retirement, he will be sent to The Hague to answer for these deaths. Your people will allow this to happen because your people will be running out of oil. And when this all happens, it will be an exceptionally cold winter. This is much like how the town hall looked when we left New Amsterdam to the English. It was the first building that the English secured when they took the city. Do you know why?
This guy says he has the names. But how could he? I don't have the fucking names.
He who controls the records controls the future, the past, and the present.
The names? Who is this guy? Why did he water? He wasn't on the witness list.
You come to me, you say, I was President of the United States. I say, prove this to me. How can you do this? There's no one here but you and I. You have no wallet, no tapes of the news. Without a record, without evidence of the past, you can't claim your own identity.
But I know.
You know what?
The truth.
Without proof, you have nothing.
This page is blank. All these pages are blank.
The trial is over. You've lost.
Over? But I didn't even... Who was the sentence?
Imprisonment in an unresponsive body.
I remember when they sentenced Musawi to life in prison instead of death. That was our greatest failure. It showed our weakness and practically invited them to hit us again.
No. That was the moment your people justified our greatest hopes.
Whose hopes would that be? That was when I decided to run for office. I knew the guilty had to be punished.
Indeed.
Indeed. I was poisoned. They poisoned Milosevic, you know.
You weren't poisoned.
Oh, so you're omniscient now. Are you really?
I count things exceptionally well. Your last meal of the non-intravenous kind? 1/4 pound ground beef, grilled. 8 ounces carrots, steamed. 75 centiliters wine. Excessive, if I may say so.
You mixed your units. Lay off, man. I'm in prison, and I don't have to get up at 5 anymore.
People coming?
You paid for the ticket. You're working on his defense.
Yes.
And you want me to testify. I do not think that you do.
He asked for you. He wants you to identify him as the man who tortured you. Don't ask me. You Americans are a strange breed.
We Americans. All right.
I thought it would be helpful to familiarize you with the procedures of the court. You have the option of giving anonymous testimony via video. We can consider your identity completely if you wish.
I do not so wish.
All right. The crimes committed at the camp are already part of the record. We will not need details from you. My client has already detailed what was done to detainees.
I know.
I will need you to testify about his presence at these events.
I could have stopped the killings. I could have said I knew the bomber. John said they would stop if I would say what I knew.
Did you know the bomber?
I met him, yes.
Photos were set lying wouldn't have changed anything.
It wasn't lying. He told me the killings would stop. I think he would have found a way to make them stop.
I'm sorry?
I committed a crime. I wished harm upon my fellow citizens. I wished suffering upon them, on the scale of the suffering that had been inflicted around the world in their name, and I wanted them to die painfully, in large numbers. When the bombing started again, I rejoiced. They built the camps to punish their enemies and their enemies' sympathizers. That is what I am. I wish their blood spilt for their crimes. They spilled mine in return. We Americans. With both bloods in it, the land now belongs to both. Don't you think?
Adams would protest his innocence until the day he... I guess you arrested the only innocent American. When did you become such gluttons for punishment? You want to be punished. Fine. Fill your own jail. Stop filling ours.
Didn't you hear? There was an amnesty. Randall's Island doesn't count as a crime where I'm from. But you've seen what we do in our jails. Maybe we think you can imprison us better.
I bought a new bed. The other one was too big, and I figured it'd be the quickest way to start sleeping again. I've been married to you 26 years, 5 months, 3 days, 7 hours, 10 minutes. I counted because I had nothing else to do. I gave birth to our son, and I spent 20 years trying to keep him safe from the world. He was all mine. He was mine for 9 months, and then he was gone. I lost him as soon as he left me. So then I tried to keep you safe from yourself. Your anger, your hate, eventually your guilt. And I failed. I'm falling in my dreams. I wake up and I've just rolled over, but instead of rolling into this wall of you, it's just rolls of empty sheets. Things seem so far away, yet right in front of my face at the same time. Falling, not falling. I couldn't live with a desert in my bedroom, but I still wake up in the middle of the night. Is the mattress you sleep on a twin too? Do you have a cellmate? You've made the news here. You've changed the whole tenor of how they're covering the president's trial. You'd be pleased to know that. Changing his legacy. War crimes, hate crimes. Crime is crime, isn't it? Crime is crime. It doesn't need to be qualified. Depriving another person of their life is a crime. Willfully causing them pain is a crime. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a uniform or not. War crimes just seem such a useless abstraction. Going to bed hungry is a crime. Not having a home is a crime. Losing your child is a crime. Those are trials I'd like to see. So I had to buy a smaller bed. We got so lost the day we looked for our first house. Bought sight unseen because the school year had already started and you needed a new teaching job with a wife and a new child on the way. We drove in circles because every street looked the same. Some bucolic upstate New York suburb. You kept muttering that, you'd find it. that calm, quiet panic I grew to love and disdain. The circles were making me nauseous, so I closed my eyes and I let your voice take me home in the dark. It was comforting because I hadn't heard that tone 1,000 times over yet. I'm on the other side of the country now. Having followed your voice to this inventive life, my name is no longer my own. And I'm sitting in the dark in this strange, smaller bed. I'm in the dark, but your voice is gone. Where has it brought me? Come back. Come back. We can run again, somewhere new. Just you and I. Follow my voice.
The first thing, the anecdote I want to bring back is after I saw their production of it last week, I ran back to New York, and one of the things we were incredibly excited about was that final monologue, Martha's Act 3 monologue. In producing it last summer, we had never solved the problem. And again, if a play has a problem, it's because the writer screwed up. And what I had never solved was, what is that? Is that a dream? Is that a letter that she's dictating out loud? And in the way that this production blocked it, it solved it in such a perfect, elegant way. And I told Sarah, the director of it last night, her eyes just lit up. She was so excited that someone had figured it out. So that's one of the things about doing these plays and about doing plays in general, is that there's always something else that you're trying to figure out and trying to develop. And it's never done, and it's always exciting to see someone else fix something that you broke, especially. I think that's all I have. If there are questions, oh my gosh, yes.
That last thing that you just said, how could you go into that more deeply? Because that's fascinating.
Yeah, well, it kind of goes to that idea of the Ibsen stage direction, is that if you come into it and you have this idea that you know exactly how it's going to appear and sound and play out on stage, you're going to be really disappointed, and everybody else working on the show is going to be really bored. There has to be something left to discover between your finishing writing it and it getting enacted on stage. If your entire message is there, then you need to write a pamphlet. Like, there has to be something about what live actors are going to bring to it, and especially what I've discovered over time is that I tend to start writing for specific performers. I start thinking about how someone inflects the language, and you start to set down these dots, and you say, I want to let Sarah figure out how to connect those dots. And then in discovering between last year and this year is that even when you've been forced to make a coherent piece, when you give that cookbook to another group and get out of the way, you know, they have to make those lines work for them. And there was a lot of back and forth with George about specific lines and specific sequences, and in my responses I kept saying, you know, when I had a good excuse for the reason I had written it that way, I said, this is my excuse, but if that doesn't work for them, it doesn't work for them. And trying to make it fit my conception of it is just going to make them frustrated. So it has to be whatever feels right in that moment. And that's it's anarchy in a lot of senses. You really have to be ready to take your hands off the steering wheel. And that's right. One of my hard and fast, I produce a lot of my own work. I never, ever, ever direct my own work. There always needs to be an intercession between the writer and the actor, of somebody trying to interpret it, because what I found is when playwrights direct actors, it's very much like, you need to do it my way. And there needs to be a certain sense of, let's make this work.
So every time, just a follow-up, so every time the play is performed, in a way you're recreating or you're reinterpreting so many layers of writing and performance, et cetera, et cetera.
It's new again every time, and that's why, again, yeah, if you wanted to, if there is only one right way to do it, then we should be writing a screenplay. Like the exciting thing about doing a live piece is that there is going to be a different read on an audience on a given night, and you know that you get a sense for longer pieces. You know, you really get a sense of what's going to land, and you get surprised. And there's an interaction going on between the actor and the audience, and you can't ever be sure that it's going to play out the exact same way on stage. And you have to embrace that. That's the best part about doing live stuff over and over again. And one of my gripes is at the top level of theaters, to guarantee getting people in the seats, we tend to use people, and my own company has been guilty of this, and it did not go well, was we had someone come in and he had done television. We were like, oh, awesome, television. He is going to bring people in. He's going to, he's going to be famous, and there's going to be a following. And it's a different skill set to be on a set where you're filmed, and you just have to get it right once, and to be able to carry the energy and the focus of a live performance for a full, 2 hours, night after night after night. They're different things, and you have to be open for it. Every night is a different shape. It's a completely different piece, and you have to be ready to embrace that and find that to be something exciting. Well, yeah.
Question, you talk about not ever directing your own work.
Yeah.
And so you've set up the writer, the director, the producer, and the actor. And as the writer, what happens if the producer or the director sort of just miss what you thought you were conveying?
Well, the cliche I have for that, I always have to have these like pithy things to keep me from losing is you have to lose the battle to win the war. And there's there's so many moving pieces when you're producing work that it has to be, I have insisted, but you can only do it sparingly. And so it has to be really, really important. There has to be a certain line or a certain moment. And otherwise, you have to have, everybody in that room has to be comfortable. And I've directed pieces that were not mine. And I enjoyed it tremendously as an exercise. And I remember I was doing a series of monologues in college, and there was an actress who she kept getting this note, and I used to get this note all the time, so I totally understand it. It said she would kind of swing her arms without thinking, and it would just kind of keep going. And we were rehearsing, and I would give the note afterwards, we'd all go home, and we'd come back the next day, and she'd do it again. It's a cycle, and so I was just thinking, she's just not getting the note, or she's not remembering when she gets to that moment. So she was in the middle of the monologue, and I came up as she's doing it, and I just very gently put my hands on her wrists, and she just stopped talking and started glaring at me. And I think we were the old, everybody else was like freshmen, and we were, big junior seniors. And she's just glaring at me, and I realized that she's kind of on the edge of tears. And so I'm talking to her very quietly, and I'm like, "You're very mad at me right now, aren't you?" Yes. All right, why don't we stop for the night, and we'll come back to this, and if we need to talk, we'll talk. And I discovered weeks and weeks later that she had suffered an assault. And so for her, the invasion of her space, as respectfully as I thought I had done it, was a line that was not to be crossed. And I lost her. I lost her as a performer. That, there was just, that trust was gone. And that taught me at a very early moment that no matter if there's something that's really, really important to me, you have to find the right way to negotiate that with all of your collaborators, because everybody has a different button. Everybody has an incredible sensitivity that you will not even conceive of, and you will never get them back. And without that trust in that room, the rest of it's lost anyway. So it's never worth fighting specific details. Yeah.
Do you find it easy to write at the nighttime or the daytime? For me and my friends, it's usually the night that really triggers our writing ability.
Yeah. Well, I think I have to admit that first of all, when I know I'm running out of time, works best. Day or night. If I'm down to days or even hours, then I really put my nose to the grindstone. But I have found that multiple deadlines and chaos work well. That it's very hard if it's sort of I'm sitting back and I have a general idea for a piece, but there's no real pressure on it. You know, I'll keep revising in my head, but it's like when pages have to be in, and when pages on multiple projects have to be in, it forces you to throw something down. And I found that my best writing is never my first thought. My first thought's crap. So it's in revising it. So the hardest thing is forcing myself to get that finished first draft. Because I know I'm not gonna like it. And if there's no urgency, you know, there's always tomorrow, I'm gonna watch a ball game. So there is something to be said for, and that's why the structure of producing has been very good, because I have to set the deadlines for other people, and it's made me much more respectful of how crazy I'm driving people when I'm not producing pages.
I know a lot of people who want to get discovered, want to do special effects or act or anything like that, are often going to YouTube, using social media, YouTube for obvious reasons is the preference. Have you done anything along those lines? Have done scenes from your plays on YouTube?
I've done casting for YouTube. I've had people submit auditions that way. It's becoming a great free way to do that if people can't travel to us. Our company has various arms. So we have stage, we have a film arm, and then we do a bi-weekly podcast where we do recordings. And in doing the podcast, it has really opened up our idea of restructuring our output in such a way that we can put it on YouTube. There are a lot of union restrictions. It's very hard for us to just take our stage stuff and put it online. I'm a member of Actors Equity. I love Actors Equity. Their media rules are horribly outdated, and it's very hard to get recorded stuff and to distribute it. And so on the one hand, it would be magnificent to not have to do this 8-month cycle. It takes us forever to get the resources and the scheduling to rent a theater, to set it up, do the PR campaign, cast and rehearse. Whereas if we broke it into pieces for social media, the sky's the limit in terms of our resources. For us, it's a matter of it's not something that we want to, what I'm seeing on web series now is people are adapting film and television ideas and breaking it down for YouTube. I want to try and do moving theater stuff on YouTube, and I'm not sure yet how to do it.
It sounds like Actors Equity is a major obstacle to doing that.
They're trying. They provide a service. They are very helpful. They see film distribution of actors' work as theft, and it's not something that's just theirs. That's a problem with copyright law and digital distribution. So a lot of people have to do catch-up. But it's a problem that they are slow to adapt to. And there are a lot of things that need to speed up. And there's no reason to use union actors except that I like to use union actors. So.
On a related note, this will be my last question. You have a Facebook page?
Our company doesn't. Well, we have a website, coitc.org.
coitc.org.
Yeah, we're a conflict of interest theater company, so our website is coitc.org. And that should link to the podcast and blogs that have much longer URLs.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has any of your actors that have done any of your work were able to like go beyond like movies and television?
Yeah. Who do we, not out of my theater company's productions. Some of the stuff that I've written, someone came, I guess I wrote a screenplay for another theater company, production company, for a short film, and one of the actors, it's called Chords. There were a lot of child actors. And it turns out that one of the actors in that was on Skims on MTV, which was just horrifying to us because when we knew him, he was like 11. I just can't even think about him you know, whatever. But we, you know, I mean, we're at this moment where we try to, I have a bunch of famous friends who I went to high school with, I went to college with, and you're kind of, I'm waiting for that perfect project to pull that trigger, that friendship trigger. Like, hey, slum it with me and make me famous.
Yep.
Yes.
With regards to casting, do you actually do a lot of scouting, or do you just like hold open auditions, or do you just like tell people very specifically like where things are going to take place and whatnot?
It's
Like, how do you go about doing casting?
casting. For us, how someone works is as important as their actual output. So we tend to usually use people that we've worked with before, friends of friends, someone where there's a common denominator. If we do scout, if I do go to a show and there's someone that I like, I try to find out. And for us, our little corner of the off-Broadway world is a lot more interconnected than you would suspect. You always know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And you try to make sure that you talk to someone who's worked with them and figure out, you know, are they going to wig out on me in week 3? Because we don't have budget or the time to, like, it has to work. And we, at the level that we produce at, I'm asking a lot of people for very little in return. So I have to know they're going to have a good time. But you know, we have open submissions. People submit stuff to us electronically. The email is conflictinfo@gmail.com, and I file all that stuff away. And I work on the boards of a couple other theater companies, so we share our resumes. Thank you guys so much for coming.